Exactly. Let's see here. I'm going to get started in just a second here. I'm going to see if I can set a timer so I stay on track.
If anyone needs internet, go to the Marriott conference, type in lowercase VMS. Get out to the internet.
Okay. Well, it's top of the hour plus a little bit. Let's get started here. I'm so grateful that VSI, in setting up this conference, actually has my presentation ready for me to go. I've been struggling with my own laptop. It's an ancient Linux laptop, and I just discovered this morning that the keyboard no longer works. Well, how did I not know that? I use a detachable keyboard when I'm sitting at my desk. So here I am trying to type in my password going, holy crap, I'm dead in the water. Everybody's going to be mad at me. But here it is. The really good news about this presentation is that it doesn't have any of the additional thoughts that I had since I had to turn this in on the 15th. So we'll actually be a little bit faster. The good news to you is that my thoughts are all available. I've made all of my presentations available in my GitLab repository for this boot camp. So I'll make sure you got that at the end of the session, how to get to that. You can download the zip, you can pull it if you want, git pull, whatever you'd like to do. I'm an open source guy by mentality, and I just like to share stuff. So, by the way, I am Lorin, that's me, I'm here. And I thought I'd talk a bit about DCL scripting, but from a structured programming standpoint, which I can still talk about in a group like this, of guys and gals who know, the history and where things have come from. You say structured coding to a youngster today, we were just in there talking about, the youngsters in young generation in our profession. And there's a lot of stuff they don't know. They're just, you say things like structured coding or structured programming to them, and they look at you like you're trying to show a puppy a card trick. They just don't get it.
That PhD professor I was talking about.
Right.
You should hear him explain an infinite loop.
Well, we're going to get to infinite loops too, Jim. So
You should hear his explanation for an infinite loop through a group of newbies.
I bet it's a riot. Well, let's
It's a riot.
get going without further ado, as they say. I love talking about the history of computing, so this will be permeated with some stuff. I want to talk about where DCL today actually is, which isn't a whole lot different than it was in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Which, yes, we love stability too. You don't have to learn a whole lot of new stuff. I do think there are some deficiencies in DCL. There are some things I'd like to, after 40 years in the profession, but how about infinite precision numbers?
Yeah.
Unlimited precision, et cetera. Right. All of the above.
There are things to go for.
Yeah, there are lots of places where we could improve it, and I'd love to see a project out of VSI to address let's call it a 64-bit DCL, and go from there.
Well, for a while, there was a company that made a DCL interpreter that ran on Windows.
Yes, I remember.
Boston Software.
Yeah, I remember that.
And what happened to them?
They vanished.
The DCL Lite and PC DCL, they're the two. Yeah.
Somebody even had TPU working on Windows at one point. So you guys are going to hijack my time. So I am counting down from at a quarter till I'll break the questions. Let me just go through some of this stuff. I really want to show you what I consider some DCL best practices. I want to talk about structured DCL. That's the core of this particular session, is to talk about the fact that you can actually do structured coding with DCL. It might be a novel thought for some people, especially if you've seen some of the crappy examples that exist in the world. And I count even things like code coming out of the old DEC team, the old VMS team, is kind of rough and ready, ratty code, go-tos here and there and difficult to follow. And does anybody remember DCL Diet?
Dialogue.
No, DCL Diet. It was
And there's DCL check. I use that all the time.
It was a script that would condense your fat, well-commented, well-structured DCL. It would squeeze out all the extra space. It would remove the comments. It would convert everything into abbreviated form
And make
so that it
unreadable.
runs faster.
$C.
F$C, et cetera. Yeah, it drove me crazy because the idea was that VAXs couldn't process DCL very quick. Well, that may have been, I don't remember feeling that it was particularly slow for the things that I wrote, but once we turned the corner to alpha and integrity, I don't even worry about that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to try to do is give you a quick rundown of some ideas that you probably could put into your bag of tricks if you're not doing it already. Things like looping and conditionals and modularity. We'll see some examples along the way. I don't have a lot of code to put up here today, but again, I heavily laced a generous dollop of my own command files into the GitHub repository so you can see what I do and take off from there with it, whatever you'd like to do.
Is there any repository where everyone can share their?
I don't know that there is, but I think we should, as a community, we ought to start one.
Yes.
Forum. Yeah, but it's not dedicated to a subject.
If you're going to, we're going to sidetrack this whole session if we do this, but that's okay. If you go for a repository, you'll want a strong librarian, you want a strong leader, somebody who can accept push requests and, kind of make sure it has some gumption, some quality associated with it. But I think that'd be a fine community project. I really do. I think it'd be something we ought to look at contributing to. I've tried to get some starter things going like that. Brief history of DCL. It goes all the way back to the very first version. Somebody thought it would be really nice to have a command interpreter. It's patterned on a fairly Fortran-like syntax, I think, is a fair way of saying it. Mostly that, that's around the go-to statement and all of that. Purpose, it's very similar to what was in the 1970s, the early shells from Unix, SH and C shell and things like that. The trick is that the Unix shells really blossomed. They went through many, many different versions. Today, most Linux guys and gals are working on Bash. Very, very complicated syntax. DCL stayed put. We call them command files because of the .com convention. That's all it is a convention. It's been stable, as I say, very, very few feature additions to the vocabulary of the command language, but there have been some over the years. I'm not particularly concerned with which ones. Oh, and there's a mention of DCL diet, as I recall it. Primary purpose was, I think, essentially system automation in the earliest days. Things like VMS install and AutoGen and the license utility and things like that we know and love. At Parsec, I taught a lot of classes on the startup sequence group, especially in Systaller Manager, sysplat.com, teach people how to modify those. Most folks simply modify sy system, no, sy startup _ VMS.com. It's right on the tip of my tongue. I can type it faster than I can say it. There have been thousands of system manager and user written scripts ever since. I mean, they're just all over the place. They proliferate. You could probably never track them all down. And many of them that's true. At my current employer, they use a .cmd convention for everything that gets submitted as a batch file and COM for everything that's used interactively. And when I ran into that, I had to say, what? Okay. So, but the neat thing about COM files among VMS users, they're pretty easy to communicate, to share, to adapt for other purposes. We should do a lot of that. I think that DCL really stands as a kind of a granddaddy to modern scripting languages. I'm a big Ruby enthusiast. I'm fluent with Perl and Python, not so much with PHP, et cetera. That's the language of websites, but it is an interpreted language. It's very dynamic in the way it operates and runs. You can do almost anything with it. It is Turing complete for those of you who are academically inclined. You can implement a Turing machine with DCL if you wanted to. It'd be ugly code, but it's doable. and virtually anything else that you want. Turing machine is a hypothetical machine envisioned by Alan Turing, the famous English code breaker and computer scientist, one of the earliest ones. Nick knows all about him. It's basically a very simple description of a very, very simple machine that can compute anything as long as you've got an infinite length of tape and you can make decisions and make marks on the tape. It's absolutely brilliantly dumb in its concept, but it is a general purpose analytical model for computing in general. If you've got Turing completeness in a language, you can essentially compute anything that is not NP incomplete. And I'm not going to go any further into the hypothetical, the theoreticals than that, but there you have it. DCL, I can't get no respect. That's kind of the way I feel about things sometimes too. Again, contemporary analogies, the languages are interpreted, not compiled. So we really do need to expect a different level of performance. We're not going to get C compiled performance or Pascal compiled performance out of DCL, but who cares, because it's always fast enough. Let's see, I gave you the interpreted, it's ceremonious less. That's a hard phrase to say. By that, what I mean is you don't have a whole bunch of declarations before you get started with code and a whole bunch of structural things that have to be followed. It's not COBOL. It's definitely not COBOL, and it's not even Pascal, which is kind of good. But that's true of most of the interpreted languages nowadays. One thing I will suggest to you as we get into this is that having some self-imposed structure, some convention for things is not a bad idea. But it is ceremonious less in that sense. It's very forgiving, one-offs, on-the-fly coding all the time. You can do some pretty serious tool building with it as well. Bad examples, I'm not going to put any up on the screen. You've probably all seen plenty of bad examples, but they're going to be spaghetti code. They're going to be twisty, dimly lit go-tos running off in all directions, and so on. I know it when I see it, it's like pornography. Professor Dijkstra said that the go-to statement, he famously said this, go-to statement must be considered harmful. This was a precept in the late 60s and early 70s, which actually led to the structured coding revolution at that time. I go back that far, I lived it. Give you the book and chapter and page there if you ever want to read his very, very entertaining letter to the editor.
Do you believe Professor Dijkstra talked about scripting language? Probably
not at all. He never talked about very many languages at all. He did everything by pen and pencil and paper and brain power. He was an analyst. He was a thinker. But his observation really kick-started a lot of revolutionary thoughts in programming in general. And I'll get to one of those here in a minute.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. The elimination of go-tos sometimes creates the most obscene code you've ever seen.
That's always true. Follow any dictum to its logical conclusion, and you can tend to end up with absurdities. There's no doubt about that. And I would recommend to you, with DCL, go-to is the only control structure we've got. So, there's not going to be any choices here. I just mentioned this because I thought it was kind of funny to think about that, and also to understand that is what led to the structured programming revolution. Professor Weert put together Pascal as a teaching compiler back in the day. We ended up using it at Electroscientific Industries for process control automation programs. We did some really, really neat things with Pascal on PDP-11s and later on VAXs. So it was Pascal is probably one of the most underrated languages. Of course, C has taken over the world, but there's nothing you can't do with Pascal that you can do with C. I mean, they're interchangeable in that regard. The point about Pascal that even C doesn't have is that it really emphasized, of course, data types, but it very much emphasized structures, loops of various sorts, repeat loops and while loops, case statements, modularity, of course. And the question is, the purpose of this conversation is to say, can we emulate this in DCL scripts? can we bring some element of structure to our DCL coding techniques so that we can actually use them again and again? Well, I would say that, there are some best practices. I learned this at Parsec. When I was teaching, we would always go through this little litany. Of course, each DCL statement must start with a $sign. That's just part of the syntax. That just kicks things off. Each line starts with $, unless it's a data line, and those are rare. I like to leave plenty of spacing in certainly column 2. I like to separate column, you can jam the command right up against the $sign, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I like to see a nice clean gutter right in front of those $signs, and then commands and labels and things like that. Big point of contention, don't abbreviate DCL verbs, don't abbreviate DCL qualifiers, et cetera, spell them out. I'm a big believer. I've got a particular individual who shall remain nameless, except he's raising his hand, who goes the other way. Jeff has been doing it that way for years. I can read Jeff's code just fine, as long as I remember what $SEA means. It's not oceanography, it's the search command, of course, file search. What Jeff is very consistent in what he does and how he structures things. So he and I actually get along pretty well. But if you're going to write something that I'm going to grade, don't abbreviate. I'll mark a gutter, just that white space of that white stripe of spaces down the left-hand side of things. That's all I mean by that. Yeah, if your mind is in the gutter, that's what it is.
Just to explain why I would choose to abbreviate it, because I think comments are critical. And I think screen space is critical. I want to read as much information on the screen as possible. So if I can make the line shorter, I can make an inline comment as opposed to a comment that takes up an entire line. So all the comments start at column 80 and work their way this way. So if I don't abbreviate, then I have problems fitting them in.
Yeah, but if I've got to look at your code and I don't know you're doing that, I'm just gonna.
Yeah, it does require consistency in training to read it.
Well, and it's like anything,
Always 48 and 132.
folks. It's like anything. You can justify it. There are reasons for it. I'm not dictatorial about this stuff. I'm simply suggesting there are different approaches to things, and that one is something that is kind of a style guide. One of the things you'll see in my code is that I indent. Yeah, don't have sidebar conversations. Indent consistently, certainly. I use lots of indentation to make clear the structure of code.
Yeah, like I always put a tab if I've got an if-then block.
Yep.
Because.
Yep. And we won't get into tabs versus spaces here. I
Oh,
refuse to go there. I refuse to do that right now. We can do that afterwards in the hall. Best practices, just be consistent and use a clean style. I think the best words of advice I can give anybody in any programming language is to communicate with your future self. You're always going to be coming back 6 months from now, looking at a piece of code and saying, WTF, what am I doing here?
The younger you get, the more important that is.
Yeah, that's right. The younger you get, the more. Rob?
Previous slide and this slide. You see, don't abbreviate, that includes parameters that you use.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Why? Because if you don't check the entire keyword, you may discover in the future that there are 2 or 3 keywords which have the beginning.
Yeah. Not supposed to have, but they do. You're right.
Sometimes people, for example, when you stick no in front of something, you get no Tiffy.
Yeah.
Is a good example on submit command.
Yeah. And
There's
set
no Tiffy.
and set noon. I keep wondering about why I need to set the clock to noon. Look, the best practice is write to be understood. Write for your future self, write for your colleagues. If you're going to share it in particular, make sure that what you're producing makes sense to other people as well. And I think we've all seen so much DCL code that doesn't do that it drives you crazy. That's why I thought this conversation would be useful. Andrea, quick. Yeah, let's keep the sidebars outside.
It wraps or it breaks and I can't cut and paste it clean.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when I write code, I always write code that's less than 80 lines. I appreciate the fact that the comments all to the right, but the problem is, if I don't put that as a text file and zip it up and send it, it's going to end up getting wrapped in.
Exactly. No, nobody likes lines that, run off into column 132 and beyond, which you can do with today's editors. You couldn't do that so much with EDT, but
When you print it out, it's ambiguous.
it's all ambiguous. You got to consider that somebody else is going to be putting this through their tools, not just your tools. So that's why we got hyphens. That break long lines into more than one line. Don't just put blank lines any place, although DCL is pretty tolerant of that. An empty line is either a $ or a $ plus a bang to start a comment. And here's something else that a lot of people don't do. Their scripts just fall off the end of the world. They terminate without terminating. It's legal. DCL will do that, it'll handle that quite nicely, and it'll basically interpret or provide an exit code of sys normal, a 1. But it's so powerful to terminate your command procedures, maybe in one collected spot at a post-amble spot, or maybe in a couple of conditionals. But when you do an exit, be sure to include a condition code, even if it's just a 1. That condition code 1 means to the outside world, whether it's an @ sign on a command line or called from within another script, it means that I completed successfully. And obviously there are other condition codes you can pass around to do more elevated and interesting kinds of exit handling. Names are important for readability. I don't know why DCL started off calling variables symbols. I think somebody had symbol table on their mind back in the ancient days. But everything is documented as a symbol, which is nothing more than a variable. There are two data types that symbols can take on in DCL. There's either a string or there's an integer. There's nothing else. So we don't have to worry a lot about data typing. As a matter of fact, DCL is pretty adept at converting between the two forms where it needs to and where it's syntactically obvious that it needs to. But that doesn't preclude the fact that, calling an explicit $$ string or $$ integer to indicate to your user, to yourself, what you're doing here is a good idea. And by the way, I never use the : equals or : equals form. If I was to write a letter to the ACM today, I'd call it : equals considered harmful, because it has some side effects. It has some behaviors that I won't get into right now. I'll use either $= or $= for globals, because I know what I'm assigning in that context, and I know what I'm getting out or what the variable that's being assigned to is actually going to be. Obviously, you're going to create logical names, especially for file opens and things like that. There's your file handle is actually a logical name, if you didn't know that. Labels themselves, including subroutine labels, is particularly important to get the name right so that you know what you're calling or you know where you're going to. I've seen so many things that just say kind of like a go to $10 or a go to splat, some weird name that doesn't mean very much. That's part of structuring your code. Be descriptive. Names really do mean something in any programming language, and you might as well take advantage of that in DCL.
In this case, why that?
Just use your own standards, use your own conventions. I like mixed case. I like what's called Pascal case. I'm not a big fan of camel case. The underscores bug me, but Pascal case with words capitalized and all jammed together, those can be descriptive. Those are pretty easy for me to read. Personal preference. Your mileage may vary. Yes, sir, quick.
One comment on that is programming for another language, like Spanish, for example.
Mhm.
Most Spanish words are not keywords in TCL, for example. You can use those as variables,
There you go.
and it tells your user what they're counting.
If they're fluent Spanish.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's.
Robert, quick.
Yeah, that's quite important. It's what meant in Hungarian.
Oh, that
That's a variable name, yes.
that would be interesting.
Two observations. One is mid-case and dangerous if you have C programmers around. Because people assume that 1 is different from 1.
Yes.
And we get very badly tripped up by the fact that it's case 1.
Yeah.
That's always a danger. Fortran, you got Fortran people lying around, they compared to Fortran case force.
A lot of modern languages, Ruby, Python, et cetera,
They're
are,
C-based.
they're all C-based, they're all case sensitive.
So.
Linux as an environment is case sensitive.
Yes,
So when you come from VMS to other environments, you need to make those distinctions clear in your mind. It doesn't hurt to get fluent with Linux and Linux concepts as a VMS guy or gal. I mean, there's a lot of good to be found in the Linux environment as well, but you just do need to make sure that you follow different conventions unless you start doing things like set process / parse equals, et cetera. You can do that. Yes, quick.
Just a note, you said use lowercase. In general, I agree, but you can take advantage of uppercase, for example, to denote your constants. That's what I'm doing.
I'm fully with you. You'll read my code, you'll see constants in uppercase because that's actually a Ruby convention that I've learned and loved. And so I've just kind of brought it into my environment. So yeah, as long as you're consistent, that's the most important thing. And your readers then will start benefiting from that consistency. I use uppercase for DCL commands themselves and the DCL controls, if then else, go to, et cetera. I put those in uppercase. I don't have to. Some other people do it the other way around. As long as it's consistent, I don't care. Now, one of the really important things here is to stop hard coding values into your code. I don't know how many places I see strings of characters in double quotes where if they just thought about the generality of their problem a little bit, they'd start computing the value and string interpolating it into that spot in the command. Because you can be so much more flexible if you data drive your code. This is a coding practice that Pascal or C coders or even COBOL coders will tend to understand, but in DCL, they tend to hard code stuff every place. So stop that. Don't, look for the opportunities to generalize your code. Control characters are hard to read if you have to drop literal escapes and shift on in, shift out, et cetera. Impossible to do. Compute it with variables. I'm not going to go very far into all of this. You see right there, I'll set a variable =, quoted string of characters. I won't rely on : equals to do that, which would uppercase the damn thing anyway, and has other unuseful side effects. It's hard to see the tick marks in all of that stuff. I don't know that I got them all right, but the string interpolation part of VMS of DCL is a really powerful thing. Any other language that has string interpolation or string substitution, as some people call it, is a good thing. Use it where you can. Robert first.
You got the ampersand?
Rarely. It always makes me think
I know.
4 times before I really realize that I can. Well, and I've run into a couple of cases where I'm trying to do a complex substitution and you need it, but not more than 1 time out of thousands. It's so rare in my vocabulary. I'm not fluent with it. Robert, quick.
Warren, what was a comment on case before? Beware who you are. I've seen this in VMS engineering scripts. I've seen it elsewhere. People write the script assuming it's ODS2.
Sure.
It's case holds. They run it on an ODS5 volume,
Right.
and you watch the fireworks display.
Yeah.
Simple
File not found.
comment. If you use the abbreviation for a command, for example, .cp, don't assume some predecessor defined. Always define those kind of equates in the individual procedure as a local symbol.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
otherwise, you may stumble across an incompatible. First of all, it may not be defined elsewhere.
Yeah.
And second of all, somebody may define something incompatible elsewhere.
Jeff just ran into one in our production code the other day. Somebody had defined copy equal copy / FTP.
Yeah.
And then along comes some other coder who sticks in a copy / log command and starts generating incompatible qualifier error messages. So, you have,
Beware.
well, maybe it was the opposite. Yeah, I don't remember. You saw the code. I didn't. You just told me about it. But so pardon me for getting the story wrong. Perfect. I'm glad you fixed it. Point is exactly that, Robert. If you're going to use local symbols, if you're going to use DCL command verbs as a symbol name, make sure you zero out, you clear out any previous definition of that. For instance, if you suspect that your user community likes to say copy equals copy slash confirm, then say into your own script, copy equals nothing or empty string.
Or beware. Local definition. If somebody can find a global, you will find it.
You're going to mask.
By
You're
deleting
going
the
to,
symbol out front of it.
yeah,
A local symbol overrides the global.
yeah. You
So,
got to understand.
the Local symbol, do
You-
not play with the global definition. You
No,
have
no,
to
no,
play
and I
with
didn't say that. I said just a single equal sign, because you definitely don't want to mess with somebody else's environment. You want your command file to run successfully all the way through without altering the environment that it's in.
So one way I do that is if you put copy X,
Yeah. that's
you
it.
can X on it, delete X.
Copy this.
Yes. Yeah,
Until somebody defines that symbol.
well, yeah.
So yeah, you gotta try and pick one. I did copy, it's underscores this to everything I want to do. Copy this, open this, so, and you've seen some of that in the code.
Yeah.
And it's a good standard as long as everybody knows, stay away from underscore this and other.
I talk about paragraphs or coherent chunks of code as if they were stanzas. I just use this word rather freely. It's not the formal definition of a stanza, but I use these kinds of paragraphs. I'll show you some examples here in a second, for things like initialization, for comment blocks, for error control, for parameter parsing. You could have a main processing loop. Subroutines obviously have got their own internal stanzas as part of their structure, et cetera. Even an exit handler. It's very nice to send everything home to a label called done or whatever you want to call it. And that's where you clean everything up, make sure everything is tidy, closed files, deleted global symbols that you created along the way, because sometimes you have to, and Bob's your uncle, you're done. Here are some stanzas. The space in between is taken it's just white space, so you can see these things more clearly. There's my gutter. You see how I like that nice white space down there, and that just gives me a clean linear structure to things. Comment block, another comment block, an error control stanza, some declaration stuff. No, I just separated, Andrea, I just separated these by blank lines for your visibility. That's all. If this was real, they're peanut.
When I do with labels, I put them within caps with no space after the dollar.
Right like that. See the done up there? I'm the same way.
Yeah.
That's the reason I like the gutter, is because then my eye can scan vertically down and I run into a label. It's right up against the dollar sign. And I say, aha, a label. And I verify that by looking at the colon after it. So again, just consistency. Your mileage may vary, but just, once you figure something out, do it to excess. Yes, sir.
CD and WSO are abbreviations.
Yes.
But why not just call it change directory?
I don't know why.
Well, let's get back to the whole don't abbreviate thing.
Well,
WSO is right to southward.
darn it, do what I say, not what I do. CD has become such a standardized acronym for change directory, and it's so much less cumbersome to the kids than saying set default. Set default, what? Puppy eyes, card trick. I don't understand what it's a CD. Yeah, it should have been.
Or S.
CD, because go the direction the horse is, ride your horse the direction he's riding.
Okay, cool.
Well,
So-
let
them continue, guys.
of the environment I used to work in, we used FD to do stuff.
I've got 11 minutes to show you a lot. A lot about loops in other languages. Let's just get to it. I hate the term infinite loop because all loops terminate. Even infinite loops terminate. If you're using the term infinite, I think you don't know what that word means. Infinity is a long time. We always terminate either by hitting Control Y or unplugging the computer. All loops terminate. So let's get over that, guys. But there's an infinite loop. I wrote that for some class sometime place. Here's a finite loop. Now, a loop is really a little bit more complex structure because what you've got to have is not only the loop construct itself, a label and a go-to at the bottom that sends you back there, but you need termination condition. You need to be able to compare something to something that says unambiguously, if I get to this state, I quit the loop. I jump out and I do something else. In this case, I'm done. So this is a very simple structural loop. You bump a counter along, you check it against whatever the user input as a limit, whether that number is 10 or 100 or 1,000, and you output a little bit of informational message along the way. This is a very useless loop, but it serves the purpose of illustration. You can elaborate this very quickly to be a useful loop, not just a finite
I've
loop.
never seen that usage where you do the read if the parameters are empty.
Oh, I do that kind of stuff all the time. I try to,
I've never thought of it.
yeah, I try to make sure that my command procedures will
Really?
accept command line parameters. But if the command line parameter is empty and I need it, then I'll prompt for it.
Yeah.
And notice also what this also could do that I do frequently, I didn't for brevity's sake here, is also say /end of file equal done. Why do I say that? Because the user might want to hit Control Z. Control Z is the standard. I'm all done. I gave up. I don't want to do this after all. That would take me to the done loop and clean exit.
No more inquiry.
No more inquire. I hate inquire like I hate colon equals.
Yep.
Those two things are vanished from our vocabulary. Oh, yes, up here, as exactly. Linux folks call this structure of type sys input. Linux folks call that a here doc. Here is the documentation. It's obviously not got $signs in front of the actual text itself. It's not bad practice, but it's not necessary to terminate that with an end of data block statement, EOD. But you don't have to do that because the first $sign in column 1 will terminate it just as if it was there. Yes, Jim?
Yeah, and you mentioned DCL diet. There is a convention for that, but DCL diet will not strip that out. I don't remember, I've seen it in a couple of command procedures, but they say specifically in some of the procedures that they want to leave the comments in.
Yep.
Usually, I think it's something like a dollar deck and then the stuff in dollar.
Yeah.
DCL diet will not take that out.
Well, that's cool. I never planned to use DCL diet in my life, so that's interesting. Interesting history.
There are some procedures that come with the kit that have that in.
Exactly. I wrote some Pascal equivalents up here. Pascal was notably historically the first language which really emphasized structural coding constructs like while loops and repeat loops and for loops. So there are some. You can reread that if you ever care to. It's just to.
And it's all on your page.
Yeah, all of this stuff is in the GitLab repository. Now, if I was to do a while loop in DCL, I'd have to do it the hard way. But it is a structured form. It has exactly the same behavior as a Pascal while loop. And it's kind of easy to read, especially if you use the word while as part of your labeling. Then you can set up in your own future self's mind or your colleague's mind that I really intend to be mimicking a while loop here. And so you give it your initialization, your upper limit counter, et cetera. And basically the structure is as you see there. It's very straightforward, very simple. This can be nested inside of an if then else block. If you need, you're quite deep in something, you could do a loop, a while loop there as well. Just indent the whole thing, just structure your code. Quickly, repeat loop just is kind of the logical inverse of a while loop, because here what you're doing is your test at the bottom. Instead of a greater than comparison numerically, you'd be doing a less than or equal comparison.
It's post-test, not pre-test.
Yeah, it's post-test, and you always execute a repeat loop once. That was the characteristic that it had from Dr. Veer. He thought that was an important distinction. And so, but again, use your labels to describe to yourself what the heck it is you're doing. it's a synthetic. It's obviously a lie. We're not doing a real repeat statement here, but it is the effective one. And it'll make your code better, clearer. For loops are only just a little bit harder. The $F element is kind of key to for loops because usually what you're doing is you're iterating through a comma separated or other delimited list of values and doing something. I do this all the time. I'll go collect a bunch of device names from my system. I don't hard code it. I ask the system, what are all the names that start with DSA? And concatenate those into a comma separated list, and then in a loop someplace, I run through them and look for characteristics and output metric reports, et cetera. Very simple kinds of stuff to do. But again, this is what your for loop would look like. You do have to drive a count loop. Your first count element in $F element, it always starts at 0, not 1.
Inconsistent. Inconsistent.
Yeah, well, some C coder thought up. So anyway, but you just have to know those things. Robert?
Or this observation, a safe practice that is always bracket string limiters.
Yes.
Start the comments one. That way, if you happen to allow manual inputs, when you put them into the procedure, abbreviations don't match.
But it lets you use F locate too.
That's exactly where I'm going. Yes, I published that a couple of years ago on my blog. The problem is, if somebody says purple ish, it can, with certain coding.
Oh, yeah.
practices,
Oh, yeah.
match, and
Yeah.
Fall down the crackle.
Oh, yeah. There are all kinds of elaborations. I know exactly what you're talking about, Robert. I comma separated front and end of certain kinds of lists just so I can handle them that way. Just so you can search for the minimum in front of another comma and get the right answer every time. There's lots of ways of handling these things. I tried to come up with a simple example here rather than go down the rabbit hole, but there's lots of things you can do in this regard. Thank you for that. Point to be made is that each of these loops has a characteristic pattern. You can start recognizing them. If you write them yourself, you'll recognize them very quickly. But if you read them in somebody else's code and they've self-documented with labels and structured properly, you'll see, oh, this is just another while loop. I understand what's going on here. Keep it simple. Quickly, I'm not going to show you much on if then or if then else blocks or the go-to, except that the go-to is going to bring us to a DCL case structure, something that's very case-like. We're going to manufacture this with a go-to statement. We're going to use string interpolated labels so that several label stanzas make up the case options. And the go-to is going to calculate the target. Ta-da! Let's read some input from a user. Show what? Go to show dollar tick mark show me. Show me is the variable that we pulled in from the read from sysdollar command. So the user is selecting which of these things to go to. Show system, which does the command. Show user, which does the command. You get the idea. Even set up a show breakdown there, so just on in case you want to actually set up an error checking go-to. Obviously, if the user types in something that is not provided in your case labeling, the go-to is going to fail because go-to show $foo isn't going to get any place. You didn't consider foo as an option. So you do have to probably structure this a bit more, control your inputs, check your inputs, but generally speaking, what you got is the equivalent is of what's on the comment side there. You've got a switch statement in C or a case statement in Pascal.
You could search for $show dollar to generate.
You can do all kinds of things to guard your input, and you should. It's never as simple as the, one page on a slide example gives you, but you guys are catching on real quick.
No one just before the first page goes to. And then catch the status right underneath of it. And then,
you could do that.
Status to
That's one way. That's one way of handling it. You could set an on error block as well.
It's actually used in some system scripts.
Oh yeah.
It actually is very just an locate bracketed string, and if you get a no starting position, you just branch the default. I
like to see a lot of an appropriate amount of error handling, and these are done with on errors and on controls. I've for years kind of developed this mechanism. It's a little bit roundabout, but the on control encounters or accounts for the case where the user types control C or control Y, hell, I want to stop, panic mode. That goes to, this is the only use of go sub I allow in my code. I hate go subs. It's the third thing I don't use. Go subs are useless, except here it's a branch to that label down there, control Y, which simply returns the equivalent value 44, which is control Y Yankee abort. Interrupt. That gets trapped by the on error, which then controls the go to done.
Then you can do exit, proper exit.
Then you can do proper exits, exactly. 45 minutes is up. I don't have very much to go since you've been asking questions all along. I'm not going to give you a Q&A session. We'll just finish this out. Procedures, subroutines are a really important part of DCL. Not very much to say about them. Understand that a call to a DCL subroutine is very, very much like doing an @ sign on the command line or doing an @ sign in your code to another command procedure. Structurally, they're very, very similar. Both forms can take parameters. It's just that the call to an internal subroutine gives you the opportunity to modularize your code, to break things down into chunks that make sense, and then actually have a main line, which consists mostly of calls. Maybe some internal logic there, but mostly calls. Yeah. They're at their own local level. Yeah. Those, it's just a fancy form of go to. It doesn't do anything.
Just before the end subroutine, you do an exit, you return status, exit dollar status.
Exactly.
Okay, and the other thing is that I use a lot of subroutines, and I use them in different command procedures. I wish there was in DCL.
I do too. I actually wrote a paragraph of code that it can only operate if you cut and paste it literally. I can't modularize it because of a number of reasons.
So I'll reuse these things, and a lot of times I want to return something to the caller. So I use a global symbol there.
Right.
My own practice is I make it G _ whatever.
Sure.
So then
you've got a tag that you
user can use it, the caller can use it. The only thing I'll do in the main line then at the end, if I want to do if F type of G _ something that are not equal to blank, then delete /global.
Exactly. You guys are very much on the right track. Yes, globals are the only way to get any kind of legitimate output from a subroutine, and you got to keep track of them. You do want to clean those globals up. Don't leave them to pollute your user's environment with whatever intermediate stuff you thought you needed. It's unfortunate. If we were to improve DCL, that would be one of the first places I'd go, is to actually let DCL return a value, or a long string of characters would be sufficient because I could structure that. But yeah, that's how it works. Keep in mind that $$ environment has a parameter to call, an argument to call, which is called command depth.
Yeah.
And that tells you the integer depth starting from 0, which is the command line. Your first level into a command procedure is level 1. If you then @ sign from there, you're at level 2, or if you do a call, you're at level 2, and so on with the nesting. So you can tell where you're at in that regard, and it's kind of useful in a few places. Go sub, just don't. I'll leave it at that. Quick example. You can read this. There's nothing magical here. I have, over the years, accumulated a library of over 40 different routines, one of which happens to take a string of characters which represents a group of global symbols. It'll accept an asterisk and process that to delete global symbols. I did another one to do command parsing along the lines, but even beyond what you were suggesting, Robert. Not to one up you. I mean, there's lots of ways of skinning cats. Here's a particular library. I found myself doing the same things over and over again. So I created a group of routines. I structured it very carefully so it could be called, and it's internally self-documenting. And you can actually ask it for the parameters for a particular routine, a number of things like that. I set up a symbol called DCL $call equal to equal. It's a global. I use it everywhere, which just invokes that command script. And then the call is actually to delete to a particular entry point, say delete global symbols. And in that case, you see, I've shown you, I can delete everything beginning with the letters ANSI and anything that looks like CMD $answer. Those are my two globals, hypothetically, I've used in a script someplace, so I can clean up at the end of things. But there are lots and lots of things in this library, and it's in the repository.
So this is your.
It's a library of routines, very much like a shared library in Pascal or C or systolic routines or something
Well,
like that.
include, which doesn't exist, would not change command level, just take the code and put it in. There.
Yeah.
Where, when you do this, you do change the command.
Yes, exactly, because it's actually implemented as a group of subroutines. So it internally, once you do the DCL call and it invokes that, it picks up the first word, first parameter, it says, oh, we're doing a delete global symbols, and it does an internal call to that label. So you'll be able to take this apart, and if you come up with new ideas, maybe I'll set up a formal repository for this, and we can have pull requests, push requests. Oh, there's the list. I forgot I put it in there. That's the roughly 41 routines right now that live there. It grows whenever I have the spirit moves me. Something will occur to me. I'll say this belongs in the subroutine library. Reuse code wherever you can. Some bigger examples, and I'm going to quit here. Who was it? Andrea, were you the one that said, long lines of, terabyte disks and all of that? I hate the fact that the development team keeps pushing free block counts like that at me. Daria, they've got to stop that. I said this to, I think, Andy years ago, Andy Goldstein. And he said, yeah, that's a good idea. Why not?
I made a screen.
Why not put commas so that people can read them? Now I can see that,
Yes.
104 million disk blocks.
Everyone did it.
We all made it.
So many this.
We all need it.
Now, does he use like tick mark instead of commas in other countries?
I have not internationalized this. No, I have not. It could be done. It could be done. That'd be a reasonable thing to do. Jim,
Where is,
pardon?
where is your repository?
Last slide. Sharpen your pencil. It's coming. This is my second to the last slide. My questions to you guys and gals are, clearly you're all experienced. Would another DCL class that focuses on this kind of thing, that then I could let you ask me any question in the world and you could stump the jock all over the place, would that be of interest to you?
You need more than 40 hours.
Probably would. But you have to limit classes somehow, or else bosses won't pay for them.
This would make a good panel discussion, like.
Oh.
Stump the DCL.
I think so too. It'd be that much fun. I also wanted to ask you, I thought after I penned that question, I said, well, what about a TPU programming class?
I have a CPU file,
Mm-hmm.
and it was developed by a team of 20 guys over a period of 20 some years. And I know about 6 of the shortcuts, and there's like 50 of them.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah,
TPU, thank you for that. TPU is worth more than just writing text editors in.
Yep.
Jeff, I know, has developed quite a library. I've got a whole bunch of things that are just standalone chunks of TPU that are embedded in a DCL driver script. So I can go through and replace global text. He's got that. This will happen a lot. I've got that. I mean, we've all encountered the same problems in processing bulks of files, and TPU is a marvelous engine. You know how the kids are all talking about the fact that their IDE or Sublime Text or Atom is customizable, and they're busy handing these packages around, which do nothing more than change the syntax coloring or change the background from light to dark. I mean, they don't know what customizing code customizing a text editor actually is. With TPU, you actually write your own functions that go under your command keys. Now, if you're lucky, you've got one that works. It works like EDT, or it works like Eve, or it works like ByKed, and you love it, or Jeff's. Everybody's done this too, who's been around for a while. But I think that's an area that I love to read TPU code. I'm always learning something. It's fascinating stuff. And that would be another class or seminar perhaps, because I'm sure we'd be sharing that I'd love to see done. And then other kinds of questions. And no, you don't get to ask me any more damn questions because you're doing it all the time. Here's the GitLab repository. Write that down. It will allow you to either zip the files together if you don't care to make a Git repository of your own. Notice that this is GitLab, not GitHub, by the way. But other than that, I mean, I love GitLab. Yeah, you can make a zip file, or you can actually clone this into your own working directory and have a working copy of the repository yourself. This contains the slides for this session and the one I'm going to give tomorrow. This session in particular has got a lot more DCL coding examples that are big examples. So you'll see my style. You'll say, hey, Lorin, you stupid, you were inconsistent here. You can pick it apart all you want. You can tell me how dumb I've been, but at least I tried and I'm offering it to you. So Jim, go ahead, wrap us up.
A long time ago, I think I remember this. Somebody did a plugin, which was a DCL language sensitive editor.
Yeah.
And do you ever remember?
I don't remember that. It probably was done for, was it done for LSC? I think there was one for LSC back in the day. But there is an IDE, the IDE, get my words straight, I say too many. VS Code that VSI is recommending. Daria's final talk on Friday afternoon, is going to cover that IDE. And I'm going to be there because I'd like to know more. My kids want to know more. And it's got really good DCL parsing, coloring kinds of capabilities. I don't know so much about snippets and things that it can actually auto expand.
This was something, and it might have been on a freeware tape, something. But if you brought this guy up in TPU and you did like you wanted to do a $if and it knew that you were going to do an if and else.
Mm-hmm.
You type $if just like you were doing this for C, then it will put then, else, and
Right,
if.
right. I've written similar capabilities in my own CAD editor. Those kinds of things are called snippets by the kids nowadays. They're into passing snippets around. That's another thing that most of the contemporary Windows and Linux oriented editors can do. And it's very handy. If you want to follow their conventions of indentation and things, there's a few conventional things. Most of the snippets themselves can be modified. They've worked out a pretty adequate, elaborate language for specifying snippets so that you can create your own. And then it's just a matter of recognizing it in the context of what you're typing and popping it up as an option in a dropdown. So yeah, those things are pretty common nowadays and fun to work with.
I thought I remember seeing something. Now I have no idea.
Sure. Folks, thank you so much for attending.